So we're getting close to time here. How are we doing on attendees? Pretty good. Let's see, I'll give it maybe one more minute, but we do want to get started on time, close to we've got a lot to cover tonight. Okay, well, we are 2 minutes past, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. I'm David Zito, a council member for the District 1 in the City of Solana Beach. Dan or somebody, if you could just confirm that you can hear me okay? Oh, I think you did. I couldn't hear you though, but that's okay. I think
Looking good, Dave.
Okay, great. Thanks, Peter. On behalf of the City Council and Climate Action Commission, I'd like to welcome you to the Solana Beach Building Electrification Workshop. I would note that it appears that we have pretty much the entire council in attendance to listen to this information. So it's great to see them and also a lot of members of our community. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to attend. This is an important topic, and I believe you'll find the information interesting and useful. I apologize that we're not yet able to do this in person, as that definitely would be more enjoyable, but it'll still be a while yet before we can do that safely, and we wanted to get started on this conversation. Hopefully many of us are getting used to this virtual meeting format, as clunky as it can be, and becoming more comfortable engaging through these tools. As you know, at the encouragement of our residents, the city has placed a very high priority in protecting the environment, and that greenhouse gas emissions, along with the resulting climate change as one of the most challenging environmental issues that we face today, this being particularly salient for us as residents of a coastal community. In my time on the council, we have undertaken several environmental initiatives, including the establishment of Community Choice Energy, and that in 2019 acquired 100% greenhouse gas free electricity for its members, those constituting over 90% of the residents and businesses in the city of Solana Beach. So we are going to take this opportunity tonight to share about other ways we can reduce our global impact and reduce our fossil fuel usage. First, I'll hand off to former Deputy Mayor and current Climate Action Commissioner Peter Zahn, who will share with us Solana Beach's climate goals, particularly those that could be attained through decarbonizing or electrifying our buildings. He'll also talk a little bit about the format of the engagement of this meeting. After Peter, we are also very fortunate to have Amy Ryder and Nick Brown, who are experts in their fields, and will share how we can take advantage of recent technology developments to reduce our use of fossil fuels in our homes and businesses. Before I hand off to Peter, I would like to thank the commissioners for putting this together and staff for enabling this opportunity to discuss these items and have this conversation tonight. So I hope everybody finds this useful, and thank you for attending again. Go ahead, Peter.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Zito. Thanks also to the support of our Mayor, Lisa Huebner, Deputy Mayor Christy Becker, and Council members Kelly Harless and Jewel Edson. A few housekeeping announcements, as Councilmember Zito mentioned. Toward the end of this gathering, we're going to have a Q&A session, so please put questions in at any time into the Q&A link at the bottom of their screen, at least the bottom of mine on Zoom. There's no need to wait till we get there. You're also welcome to mention any organization you're affiliated with if you wish. Another thing you can use, which I haven't yet, is in the Q&A where someone asks a question and you are interested in the answer, you can upvote the importance of the question. So I haven't tried that yet, but you're welcome to give that a shot. The chat feature is also available. However, the raise hand function is not active, so please don't use it. Okay, well, for background, I'm going to show two slides that summarize where Solana Beach is from a climate environment point of view. Councilmember Zito started to get into it, which is great. And let me mention that last year, our city council declared a climate emergency. And of course, the science indicates that the climate crisis is worsening. Next slide, please. So the city's climate action plan identifies our sources of greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see on the pie chart, the largest contributors to Solana Beach's greenhouse gases are on-road transportation and electricity and natural gas. We have several measures to reduce transportation emissions, and the city has implemented a community choice energy program, as the council member mentioned, and that's reducing our emissions from electricity. With 15% of our emissions coming from natural gas, which you can see in the red section on the chart, that's in homes and other buildings, we have an opportunity to make further greenhouse gas reductions, particularly with new buildings. So next slide, please. Now, looking at it another way, you can see that our climate action plan has two overall goals by 2035. The first is to cut by half from our 2010 levels. That's an annual reduction of 139,000 metric tons, as the slide says. That's actually the equivalent of taking a car that gets 25 miles to the gallon and driving it for 334 million miles. That statistic is in our climate action plan. Our other 2035 goal is to have all the city's electricity come from renewable sources. The climate plan's top three reduction measures, which are shown, are on the transportation side, to increase the proportion of EV miles driven. That'll get us over 17,000 metric tons in emission savings. The next highest you can see is buildings and renewable energy. And this is where substituting electricity for natural gas, at least in new buildings, could help us toward that 10,000 plus metric ton reduction of CO2 that we need. And the third, community choice energy, mentioned earlier, we have about 92% of our city's residents and businesses purchasing largely renewable energy, 100% renewable, as Dave Zito mentioned, through the city's program. So the bottom line, in order for us to achieve our biggest goals and do our part to beat back the climate crisis, is to decarbonize the electricity supply and electrify transportation and buildings. I'm now pleased to introduce Amy Ryder of the Building Decarbonation Coalition. All yours, Amy.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate that introduction. And good evening, everyone. Here we have all the council members as well as the mayor here. So thank you for attending, the local elected officials, as well as all of the residents of your fine city there. Really appreciate your taking time out of your evening to learn a little bit about building electrification. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. I'll tell you who I am. So just for some context, I'm with the Building Decarbonization Coalition. We are a not-for-profit, multifaceted membership-based organization, and we represent manufacturers, local governments, NGOs, and other nonprofits, as well as utilities. So it's a very diverse group. We also include some designers and architecture firms and engineers as well. So it's a big group. And in particular, where the reason I was asked to come speak with you this evening is give you some context about really the importance of building electrification. And Peter, you teed it up really nicely. So I'll just dive right in. So as Peter mentioned, buildings are the second highest cause of greenhouse gas emissions, or as we often paraphrase, carbon emissions in the state of California, right after our vehicle fleet. And it's an important piece of the equation. Certainly vehicles seem like they're the center point often, but they're not the only thing that individuals can do to electrify. And in particular, buildings, because of their long life cycles, certainly are an important piece of the equation. And in particular, when we look at this clean electricity that you have because of your fabulous CCA in Solana Beach, the cleanliness of your electricity really gets us really far. You're already ahead of the state. This chart is intended to show the cleaning of electricity over the course of time with the state of California. But the challenge is we don't yet know how to clean up our natural gas supply system. And so it's switching to electrification for all of our end uses where we can gets us there that much faster. And so that's really the intent of building electrification at large. And I know that there has been some conversation about the opportunity for cleaning up gas. And I just, my next slide is actually intended to talk about that just briefly to give you some context about biogas in particular, or what is also called renewable natural gas. And so I just wanted to address this, and I'm sure there will be questions as well, but there are some interesting technological fixes for the cleanliness of the natural gas system. But unfortunately, just in terms of sheer amount of supply, there is not nearly enough to address today's demand. As you can see today, if we were to swap out renewable natural gas for our natural gas, we would end up with less than 13% of our total demand. And even with switching out to higher efficiency gas appliances, we just don't have enough of it in state to really fulfill that need. And so we generally suggest that we save that renewable natural gas for industries that are hard to electrify. And buildings, as you'll quickly learn here, are not one of those, especially for residential buildings in particular. Next slide, please. So when I talk about building electrification, it really comes down to 4 major appliances in residential applications. And everything I'm talking about here mostly relates to new construction, just to be super clear about that. It doesn't mean you can't take action in your existing homes today, but the target for most of our efforts is around new construction, at least for this conversation. And those 4 appliances are your dryer, your water heater, your furnace or air conditioning unit, which this device on the far left here, that's a heat pump, and it does both heat and cool, and then cooking. So those are really the primary targets when we talk about building electrification. And Nick will be diving into some more detail about each of those. So what are the benefits of this zero emission building or this building electrification? So there's lots, which is part of the challenge when we talk about this, is that it's multifaceted. So they are definitely cheaper to build, which is why the focus on new construction. And for most people, they're cheaper to operate as well. They're healthier, more climate friendly, which is certainly the framework that seems like it's most important to Solana Beach, but safety matters too. So all of those are benefits around electrification. So to talk for a moment about affordability, there's a couple of elements to this. Most prominently in new construction, the avoidance of installing the natural gas piping to a new home, and especially to a new development, can save quite a bit of initial construction costs because you're avoiding that piping altogether. And so we have a range here as presented from a couple of different studies of how much that can save in initial construction, $1,500 to $6,000 in cost. And then residents over the course of a 20-year life cycle are also showing a cost savings, even before solar, which in new construction in the state of California is required. So, and that further lowers the bill over the life cycle of a new building. And then it kind of just as an added bonus, it protects against what we're expecting will be large increases in price for the gas delivered to your homes. We're already seeing approved rate hikes across the board from various gas utilities, and they're on track to be 3 times faster growth in the natural gas pricing sector. So health is the other peer that we talk about a lot, and this is probably an area where we should spend some time. But in particular, burning gas in your homes is not advised. And there's a lot of different reasons, and certainly the different list of pollutants here at the top is an abbreviated list, but there are problems. As I think we're all aware of carbon monoxide. We have our monitors and our meters and our alarms in our homes now to tell us if carbon monoxide is being released, but there's other chemicals that are released when we burn gas in our homes as well. And there's some not really even newer, but some really compelling studies that show that children living in homes that have stoves in particular that burn gas are actually at an increased risk of asthma rate that is not insignificant. And then talking about kind of the outside air as well, the air quality is absolutely impacted by burning gas in homes, which this is one that completely startled me when I first read it. That light duty vehicles are actually on par in terms of their contribution to outdoor air quality with buildings. It's very close compared to power plants, simply because even our natural gas burning plants are just so much cleaner. They are pretty highly regulated, and there are fewer of them, so it's easier to regulate them. And then I don't think we can talk about electricity these days without talking about resiliency. This is just a really important part of the equation. And so a couple of things I'll say about this. One of the things I think about electric homes is around the ability to back up the whole system with some sort of battery bank, or eventually our cars or something of this nature, and be able to someday have full backup power in the event of short-term power outages, PSPS and otherwise. Hopefully those will be less popular or less common in the coming days as we harden our electric grid and continue to build resiliency of the electricity grid itself. But there's also the component of other reasons that the power might go out. And believe it or not, electricity, when it goes down, is faster to restart than when the natural gas system goes out. So in case of an earthquake, you're usually looking at weeks for gas systems to come back up as opposed to just a couple of days. So there's some benefits from that perspective, depending on what type of emergency you're dealing with. One thing in particular I should point out is that just from a resiliency perspective in general, is that all modern appliances use electricity to start, so that some of you may have a pilot light in your water heater at home today, so you are able to have hot water if the electricity is out. That's not the case for new construction because pilot lights don't exist anymore. They're all electric starts for safety reasons. And so there's no real benefit to having gas in home during a power outage anymore. The exception to that particular rule is the gas stove. However, because the fan and the ventilation, as I pointed out, is rather important for health reasons, you can't run that when the electricity is out. So it's a little bit of a challenge. We don't want to have you effectively running a generator in your home without any ventilation. Not to mention safety, and certainly the combustibility of gas remains a problem. And there we can certainly talk about some of the technologies and how that relates as well. I think it's at this moment that I get to turn it over to more technical presentation from Nick Brown. So Nick, take it away.
Thanks, Amy. That was awesome. And if you go to my next slide, I'm an energy consultant broadcasting to you tonight from this house in Long Beach, which I remodeled to be net zero about 6 years ago. And I too was startled, Amy, by that stat you just showed about outdoor pollution of buildings being roughly on par with those of vehicles. And the stat that I wish I knew then, when I remodeled my house, was the one you showed earlier on greenhouse gas emissions. And to put it in another way, the greenhouse gas emissions today of a new home built to be all electric are 40% lower than that of a mixed fuel home, a home that drives those 4 end uses you showed by gas. If I'd known that, I would have made a different decision. I would have chosen to make my building all electric. Whereas when I did my remodel, I put in an efficient gas furnace and an efficient gas tankless water heater. I'm thinking those were the best options for me. I'd make a different decision today. But I'm an energy consultant by trade, and I teach classes for some of the utilities, including one on all electric homes, which is how I came to be here today. And the full version of that class is being offered by Edison next week, if you're interested in signing up through their online portal. Next page. Now, our state has already committed ourselves to very ambitious goals in terms of reducing our emissions. SB 32, the overall greenhouse gas emission reduction. The electric sector, 100% renewable electricity by 2045, which that chart Amy showed earlier showed that an all-electric home benefits directly as that grid cleans up, whereas a mixed fuel home, only the electric portion of the energy use of that house benefits. So we're really saddling our buildings with stranded gas systems that aren't going to benefit from the improvements we make in our grid if we build mixed fuel today. Also, you see there 40% reduction in buildings. Buildings are absolutely right up there with vehicles in where we need to concentrate. And I would say if you build an efficient all-electric building today, and you drive around in an EV, well, you're targeting 80% of that pie chart that Peter showed at the beginning of Solana Beach's emissions. So you really can feel good about doing all you can. And let's not forget, these are California goals shown on the left, and the rest of the world is working on this problem too. So this unites our cause with them. And really the only way we meet these goals is by building electric new buildings, and I would say remodeling existing buildings to be electric to, I think that was Lane's point in the Q&A. Next slide. And this is a pie chart showing gas use in California homes. You can see water heating and space heating are far and away the biggest users of natural gas, accounting for about 2/3 of the total, with cooking, clothes drying, and other various uses making up the remainder. We have electric replacements for every single one of these natural gas uses that has significant technical superiorities, is on par in terms of installation costs and operating costs, if not in some cases better than the gas equivalents. So I'm going to highlight those for you here in this middle section of the presentation before I hand it back to Amy. Next slide. Let's start with the biggest slice of the pie, which is heating and cooling, and that's accomplished with electric heat pumps. Now, if you're like me, growing up, you didn't think much about that outdoor cube sitting in your backyard. You thought of it as your air conditioner, and I always thought that air conditioner magically blew cold air into my house. It's not true. When we're cooling our homes, we're actually rejecting the heat out of them. And this is what's shown in the left picture. Whether you're doing it with a regular air conditioner or if you're doing it with a heat pump, what we're doing is the refrigerant moves in those little copper tubes between the outdoor unit and the indoor unit, taking heat out of our space continuously. That outdoor unit is just a fan that expels it using the compressor cycle. Then that spent refrigerant goes back in and it's cooler, and that's how we cool our spaces. Now, heat pumps are reversible. So in winter heating season, they're going to do the opposite. They're going to take all the ambient heat in the outdoor environment. They're going to compress it down using the compressor cycle, concentrate it in effect in the refrigerant, pump that into the house, and now we're blowing hot air into the house and taking cold air back outside. So heat pumps are basically reversible air conditioners. They're nothing that exotic. You have heat pumps in your refrigerators and many other kitchen systems. And as the next slide will show, they're really more elegant in a lot of ways than the way we've traditionally heated and cooled our California homes. The upper left diagram is an attempt to recreate the status quo, a traditional, conventional gas furnace combined with an air conditioner with a big system of ductwork distributing that heating and cooling through air. And you'll notice that system looks a whole lot more complicated than the picture below it, a ductless mini split heat pump system. And that's really what this slide is trying to convey. We've gotten really good as an HVAC industry at executing this very complex system. But because it's complex, there are savings to be had from going to a simpler, more modern technology of a heat pump. You'll notice there's no flue pipe in the heat pump scenarios 2, 3, and 4. There's no gas line. In some cases, the ductless mini split, for instance, there's no ductwork at all. We're just moving heat with the refrigerant lines, and everything gets done by the indoor unit. Now, numbers 2 and 4 on the right show duct-based, air-based means of accomplishing the same thing, all electric heating and cooling using the reversible system. And by using 2 and 4, we're able to get traditional aesthetics, the normal way of heating and cooling our homes, while still getting, to some degree, the efficiency of the heat pumps. The difference between 2 and 4 is a mini split system, whether it's 3 or 4, modulates the delivery of heating and cooling up and down according to the load. So it's like a variable approach to it. Whereas the heating and cooling systems we've all grown used to and grew up with, they're on or they're off like a jet engine, right? We're used to them cycling. And a lot of the efficiency in these advanced heat pumps, mini splits, comes from that modulating and being able to only deliver the heating and cooling that's needed at the time and just manage temperature set point consistently. Next slide. So here's a cutaway showing the traditional mini split heat pump system. It consists of an indoor unit and an outdoor unit connected by refrigerant lines run invisibly through the walls. And those are the same refrigerant lines that connect your outdoor air conditioner with your indoor air handler today. And the indoor unit contains a small fan. It's continuously filtering the indoor air as it comes in, and it's delivering heating or cooling depending on the season. So there's no energy loss from ductwork. They're much more efficient. And as I said, they're inverter driven, so they modulate the delivery to the demand, makes them a lot more efficient. But that's not the only way to put heat pumps to take advantage of these more efficient systems. Ceiling cassettes provide very attractive aesthetics without that high wall unit and the same efficiency gains, no duct losses. This one on the right, if you look on the one on the left, they're both connected with refrigerant lines to outdoor units, just like in the prior slide. But all of the mechanics are hidden up in the drop ceiling. So I think very contemporary. These are residential versions of cassettes that used to be commercial buildings only and much larger. You can see these make them, I think, very clean to look at, very efficient and comfortable. The next option is a ducted option. And this is a ducted mini split sort of behind the scenes under the hood. The same mechanics that you saw on the high wall unit are being accomplished in this, galvanized metal version that's hidden behind a drop ceiling. Can also be put in an attic, although we do recommend putting it on the conditioned side of the thermal boundary for efficiency reasons. And you can see on the left, the ductwork is just taking short runs. So you can often accomplish this in small footprints where you put the ducted mini split heat pump in a drop ceiling and you have 3 or 4 short duct runs to bedrooms and bathrooms and living rooms. And you can accomplish all that without having that octopus up in the attic where you're losing a lot of heating and cooling. Studies show that old duct systems are often 30% leaking up there, and that's doing you no good. So these are a great option, and they give you traditional aesthetics, such as you'll see on the next slide. This is what we call a linear diffuser, very clean, contemporary looking. I think you'd agree it would belong in many Solana Beach's finest homes. And it's got a ductless mini split behind it, or it could be a central heat pump up in the attic. So the aesthetic reasons are not the reasons to avoid heat pumps. They're extremely efficient. Also, when you have those indoor units, be they cassettes or the high wall units, each one of those is going to have a different temperature set point. So if you have one in the office, you can have it at a different schedule and temperature set point than in your living area, than in your sleeping area. So that's just one of the many technical superiorities to the traditional central ducted system we're so used to. Next slide. And if you're in multifamily or hotel motel, they make package units that go through the wall just like your P-tax, but they're heat pumps and extremely efficient. So we have solutions there as well. Next slide. When I model them in my quantitative energy models, and Peter warned me this was too wonky of a slide, but I'll just zero in on climate zone 7, where you are in Solana Beach in the red box. It's a wash. Look at that. The energy use of a gas split system versus a central heat pump is roughly equivalent in your climate zone. Next slide. And if you choose a ducted mini split, a ductless mini split, now you're going to be slightly ahead. That's the orange bar, as I call it, a variable capacity heat pump, or VCHP. You're going to have energy savings. And furthermore, I just looked at your rate structure. My word, you guys are heating your homes with 3-cent kilowatt hours all winter. When you compare that to what PG&E and Edison ratepayers are paying, it's 6-7 times that much. And even there, when I run the numbers, there are cost savings to be had from switching from a gas furnace split system to a heat pump. So I imagine when I run the numbers in your territory, comparing regular retail gas rates to your CCA electricity rates, you're going to come out ahead. All right, next, the rest of the house. Let's talk about water heating, clothes drying, and cooking. First, the water heater. Remember, this was the other big end use, the big energy user. And we have great electric options for these too. As you can see in the picture, the condensing unit is on top of the tank. They come in 50, 65, and 80 gallon tank units, even 40. And they're less expensive to install, operate, and maintain. No flushing the lines like gas tankless. They have efficiency ratings of 300 to 400%. How do they do that? That just doesn't sound real world, right? Well, because they're taking that ambient heat around them and compressing it into the tank. And as a result, they vent off the cool air, which often can be a pleasant environment to have your workbench next to, let's say, if this is in your garage. So there are some side benefits that we can use with the heat pump water heater that are kind of nice too. They're also high tech, right? They've got controllable set points on that panel there. You can put it in vacation mode when you go on vacation. I mean, these are things we can't do with our regular water heaters, be they gas or electric. So super efficient. And let's not ignore they store fresh water for just in case the terrible happens. And our gas tankless water heaters don't do that. We do need to think about where we put them. They're best in a garage, an outdoor closet, even an outdoor lean-to. You don't want them in your master bedroom closet, right? They make a little noise when they're creating hot water, but nothing more than your dishwasher or fridge. So it's within reason. Just need to be careful. Next slide. This is the duct curve. For more information, go to one of my other classes. We don't have time to get into it here, except to say that heat pumps are seen in California as one of the solutions to the mismatch between when solar power produces power and when our homes need it, that caused this really steep 4 p.m. ramp up that the grid has to do every summer afternoon. Heat pump water heaters are part of the solution to that. And next slide, press the button. And in Sacramento, SMUD has a really new innovative program that pays people with heat pump water heaters $150 to install them in such a way that they help with that late afternoon ramp, and even pays them $2 a month. So these type of programs are coming to other utilities soon as well. Next. And when I model heat pump water heaters, similarly in your climate zone, they outperform gas tankless. When I look at utility costs, they're roughly a wash in the retail utility areas. So I can only imagine you're going to be ahead in climate zone 7, especially with all that warm air that you have year round. Next. Now, here are some of the counterpoints you'll hear on heat pumps. They come with electric resistant heat strips, and that's where you lose all your gains on the heat pumps. Well, not in Southern California. Our heat pumps don't need heat strips to be to keep the temperature set points in winter. We have a very mild climate, and they've come a long way since early models did require heat strips to keep up in the Sierras or somewhere like that. Keep in mind, Arctic, buildings use heat pumps. They don't have natural gas up there. Minnesota does, Northern California, etc. Heat pump clothes dryers. I just installed one of these here because my gas one gave up the ghost in just 5 years. Couldn't be happier with it. It's a little bit more money up front, but I find much less lint on the filter. It's gentler on the clothes because it's using a much lower temperature set point. And heat pump water heaters, they have a resistance heat strip in there too that kicks in if it's Thanksgiving and if you've got 6 family members and you're having some unusual load on the heat pump water heater. I see that as a feature, not a drawback. You want that ability to recover quicker, once or twice a year. And you can set your unit to run only in eco mode, or you can set it to run like that. So you have the control. So I think all these arguments are easily argued away. Next. Couple more slides. Cooking. I put in an induction cooktop, couldn't be happier with it. And this study by SMUD finds really the preference for gas cooking is something that seems not real. It's based on people never having tried induction cooking, because they found 80% people had a negative view of induction cooking before trying it, and 90% of those people had a positive view of induction cooking after trying it. Which leads me into Peter's new program that he's going to introduce here in a minute to test induction cooking for yourself. I encourage you to do that. Next. So they work by heating up the cookware, not the air around it. No gas combustion byproducts, which Amy touched on. And your kids can reach over the edge of that countertop and touch the glass surface and not be afraid of burning themselves. Even the tops of the pans and pots sometimes I find are cool to the touch. It's just a lot more safe way to cook and quicker. It boils water so fast. The digital controls, I think, appeal to people who are used to digital watches and digital controls elsewhere. So this is not something to be feared. Next. A lot of great models out there, affordable too. Next. Oh, and here's the heat pump clothes dryer. I get a lot of questions on this because it doesn't require, it's a closed loop, it doesn't require a vent to the outside, right? We're used to our dryers blowing the moist air out through that little duct. Well, these don't. What they do is they heat up the air to a lower temperature set point. Yes, they circulate it the same way through the drum, but instead of blowing that moist air out, they condense the moisture out of it and pump that water down the drain, just like your washer goes down the drain. So really helpful when you have a land-blocked dryer stall and you can't get to an exterior wall to vent it. As I said before, gentler on the clothes because it dries at a lower temperature. Yes, it adds 10 minutes to the cycle time, but that's no big deal. And I've found really energy efficient too. Next. Oh, there it is. You see, I stacked it on the old LG. Next. Even fireplaces have solutions today, and this was taken at a trade show. You can see this roaring fire. And my friend reached out and touched it real quick, and then realized, wait a minute, that's not hot at all. It's a complete illusion using water vapor and LEDs. So innovative companies are coming up with solutions to all of the traditional gas uses in our homes. And I would recommend an outdoor gas grill for just in case you need it. Next slide. I think I've just got one more. Yeah, this is a quick chart showing some of the cities that have already decided to go beyond state minimum and push further with their own what we call REACH code, a local energy code that goes beyond the state minimum code. Most recent were San Francisco, Oakland, and closer to us, Ojai. Santa Monica is a real leader in Southern California. But as you can see from this visual, Southern California is lagging. Northern California is really making us look bad. So hopefully there's some discussion here at Solana Beach picking up that mantle, because California really is leading the nation in this area, and leading cities within California are leading the state to do more.
Great, thank you so much, Nick. That's a fantastic overview of the technologies, and it's pretty fun, actually. And just in case you're wondering, yes, it's induction. It's right behind me. So my 9-year-old thinks it's the best thing ever because she can safely cook on it on a daily basis. So I want to turn now just briefly to some of that larger point that Nick made around what local governments are doing, and just to give you some context for what some potential opportunities might be for Solana Beach, and to talk about how that affects the rest of the state, frankly. So just a quick overview here of some local government things. For those of you less familiar with energy, the state of California has an energy code, which we call currently the 2019 code, went into effect in 2020. And there is a mechanism in place that you may have heard about in the news, which is called a REACH code, where a local government has the ability to go beyond that state code. And lots of people are doing this around the state. So that's what Nick was talking about in terms of those REACH code opportunities. And there are 42 jurisdictions across the state who have already done this. And just to give you some insight as to what that looks like, and to be clear, that's entirely around new construction. And I see that some folks have some questions about existing buildings. And I do think that's completely fair to have those conversations about what's right for you and in your individual circumstance. So we'll get to those questions in just a minute. But the REACH codes are just about new construction, which is why I emphasize that, because what it does is gives you the opportunity to look at any new construction, which there might not be a lot of in your jurisdiction, but at least stop making the problem worse if it's the right thing for you. So where that breaks down, if you'll go to the next slide here. So of the 42 cities, there have been 3 primary approaches across the state. And this is not to say one is better than the other, just to give you an example of what cities are doing. Those 3 options. So the smallest piece of this pie is the blue one, and that's the natural gas infrastructure moratorium, like the city of Berkeley did. They were the first actually to do this in 2019. There's a handful of other cities who have done that as well. The second popular option is the electric preferred, which starts to send a market mechanism to builders that they can have the option, but have a preference for electrification by making it a little bit easier to comply with the building code. And then the most popular by far is the all-electric REACH code, which is effectively saying that you can no longer build with natural gas, either for all appliances or for some of the appliances. And on the next slide, it gives you a little bit more detail as to how this works, because there's a number of opportunities. Local governments can use that energy code as a baseline, but they can also use the health and safety code. And there's lots of complexity here that we don't need to get into, but just wanted to point out there are different requirements for each of these, and they're all potential options that can be up for consideration or discussion at any individual city, including yours. So there's that's the end of my formal presentation, and I get to pass it off again. So thank you. I look forward to answering questions when we come back online for that.
Okay, Peter here again. And as Nick kind of let the cat out of the bag, we've got a special announcement. And right before that, then we'll go into Q&A right after this. But the San Diego Green Building Council is starting a portable induction cooktop loaner program. And what they're doing sort of to coincide with this workshop is making available their first rounds of loaner portable cooktops to Solana Beach residents. So for a limited time, there'll be 12 of them that are available, and they're available free of charge. It's a matter of signing up if you'd like to give it a try, if you're a Solana Beach resident. Otherwise, they will be unrolling this program out throughout the county. So others will be able to come on in later waves. There is a email address right there. So for any Solana Beach residents who would like to sign up, send an email to cooktoploaner@gmail.com. That's the one that's there, cooktoploaner@gmail.com. And arrangements are being made so that pickups and drop-offs will be in Solana Beach to make it really convenient. So now I'd like to go to Dan King, our Assistant City Manager, who'll be handling the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me? I had some technical difficulties.
Yep, sure can.
Great. So good evening, everyone. Glad you all could join our educational workshop here tonight. I'll be handling the Q&A portion of the workshop. Thank you to Nick and Amy for those great presentations, and Peter for adding in your slides as well. It looks like people are already starting to ask questions on the Q&A, which is great, and also upvoting the questions. So we'll take the questions that have the most upvotes first and work our way through the list. I think we have plenty of time to get through these questions, but feel free to keep adding to those. And if you did add questions to the chat, if you don't mind putting them in the Q&A, that would make things easier. But we will try to get to all those, even if they are in the chat. So moving on to the first question, looks like it's coming from Lane Sharman. Lane, good to see you out there, or know that you're out there. So his question is, in reality, Solana Beach is largely built out. Therefore, isn't it productive to engage all stakeholders, including existing building owners, to ask, what can we do to electrify new and existing buildings? And before I throw it out to Nick or Amy, if you want to answer that, I do want to emphasize that from the city's perspective, this is the very first workshop we're doing, really focused on education and getting information out to the community. So if we continue down this path, as Amy mentioned, there are different options the cities throughout the state have taken. And I think we have to take into account those local conditions, which you're right, most of the properties here are built out. So if we go down that path as we move forward, I think we'll take that into consideration to what would be the most effective for our city. So with that, Amy or Nick, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll jump in and say absolutely. I think that existing buildings are a major part of the equation, and certainly I encourage anyone to take this opportunity into consideration as you're replacing any appliances that are burning out or in need of end of life replacement. It is a process. It's a rare opportunity that people have to switch out everything at once. So it's no small task. So I don't expect that that's what we're looking at in terms of the reality. But change out over time certainly is recommended. I know that's been our approach in my house, is to slowly as needed, with the exception of the stove, which I have small children, so I felt like that was a priority for us, but to do so as is convenient and financially accessible. So it's when making those investments, I highly recommend folks consider the electric alternatives rather than reinvesting in natural gas.
And I'll just add that, we have to think about those less fortunate who don't have the budgetary resources that some others do when we put codes in place for remodels. It absolutely needs to be done wherever possible. And I'm clear on that. And especially for a city like yours and like mine, Long Beach, largely built out, we're not going to make many gains without focusing on existing buildings. Santa Monica is a similar situation and provides a useful precedent here. They have a different code for their existing buildings where they say if you add a second story or more than 50% of existing floor area, we'll consider that a different category and ask you to add some upgrades, but by no means the same as new construction. So you have many options available to you.
Great. Thank you both. Moving on to the next question, and this is from a Mr. Jada, and I apologize if I mispronounce your name. But will there be the ability for residents, consumers to compare overall cost for several different technologies products?
I alluded to that in a few places. I've run models like that for Edison and PG&E. I would expect the similar relationships that I saw there to be present in Climate Zone 7, the mildest climate zone in California. Congratulations to you all. You live in the best part of the state, but I haven't run the numbers. As I said before, you're comparing normal gas rates to extremely cost-effective electricity rates through your CCA. So those conversions should look extremely attractive. And perhaps before the next time we all get together to talk about electric buildings, I can run some of those models and try to give you more clarity there.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next question from Mr. Oman. In parallel with building electrification, many consider reductions in per capita consumption of electricity of paramount importance. Otherwise, the City of Solana Beach and others runs the risk of creating a rapidly accelerating demand for electricity for heating homes, water, cooking, etc., with likely increases in prices. In order to mitigate the overall growing electricity demand, please advocate for much more vigorous efforts to reduce per capita consumption as well. This can be done by better insulating homes, windows, implementing widespread rooftop, solar water heating, etc. I'm not sure if there's a question in there, but if any of you would like to address that or have any comments to that.
Absolutely agree. Insulation, windows, there's so many other aspects of our buildings we can improve, and it'll save energy whether it's gas or electricity. So it's right on.
I also agree, but I just would like to point out that our electric system is designed for peak cooling in the summer. And the idea of having some electric heat as well should not in any way affect the grid's capacity to take that on simply because we have some excess in the winter. There is need for further electrical expansion across the grid, as we already discussed, like grid hardening and more protections for resiliency in the electrical sector in general, especially as more electric vehicles come online. But the demand for electricity for heating homes actually is mostly there already.
Great. Thank you both. The next question looks like it's a request to go back to Amy's slide to expand on the differences between the three different approaches. And I assume those are the ordinance approaches or approaches for the city. Thank you, Rimga, and take it away, Amy.
Yeah, happy to do so. Although I will say that if this was really intended to be a high-level introduction for those to start the conversation in case the city decides they want to pursue something like this. So additional conversations will be necessary, but happy to give a little bit more context here. So of what the other cities across the state have been doing, just to spend a moment here, I think the one that's most clear is the natural gas moratorium, which just means you can no longer put the pipe in. That's what that means. And it's using the health and safety code for the city. And because it's using a code that is long standing, while it's a difficult political move, it actually is the longest lasting in terms of ordinance at the city level. The all electric ordinance is similar in terms of its results, but it is shorter in terms of its time horizon because of the way it is engaged. But the one that probably deserves the most explanation is the electric preferred. And effectively what this looks like is that for a new construction project that is all electric, there's no additional requirement. It is just, you have to meet the energy efficiency requirements set by the state of California. But if you are pursuing a mixed fuel building, a building that still has natural gas in it, you would have to exceed those energy efficiency requirements generally by approximately 10%. It does vary by each individual city, but that's the one that most closely mirrors this geographically to Solana Beach is the Santa Monica approach, and that's what they have adopted there. So I'm not sure if there's a more specific question, but that's a quick overview of these different options that perhaps the city will wish to pursue in the future.
Great, and I will say, I think there was a question in the chat regarding this. This workshop is being recorded as well as these presentations will be placed on the city website after the workshop is over, I'd say the next day or so. So if you want to take a look at the presentation closer yourself, go ahead to the www.cityofsolanabeach.org and you can find the video recording as well as the presentations. Okay, moving on to the next question for Mr. Friedman. I live in a 35-year-old townhouse. I recently had to replace my furnace. I tried to go with electric heat pump, but installers would not provide it, saying our ducts are too small for cooling. They said the only option is a complete home remodel. Is there another all-electric option just for heating?
Heat pumps are the best all-electric option by far. And I'm trying to guess how that was said. Typically, the smallest gas furnace is 48,000 BTUs that's available. That's 4 tons of cooling, which probably is well in excess of what you would need in Solana Beach. So if those ducts are capable of carrying that much heat, you would think they'd be capable of carrying that much cooling. Yeah, feel free to reach out if I can help further, but no, I can't make sense out of that.
Great.
Yeah, I don't have anything really to add there. It might be worth consulting with a different contractor to see if they agree. My house is 125 years old, and that wasn't a problem for us. So. And
as a follow-up, have you experienced, or is it common to have contractors or consultants coming into the house and not being familiar with the newer, I guess, technologies, and would the recommendation be just to, look around till you're comfortable with somebody?
Yes.
So
go Amy.
Go ahead.
We're both working on the
it.
problem right now, aren't we, Amy?
Yeah, I was just going to put a pitch in. We're still working on, but we have done the initial launch. It does not cover the whole state yet, but there is a consumer-facing website that will soon feature contractors who have experience directly on electrification everywhere in the state, including Solana Beach, we hope. And that is called switcheson.org, and I'll put it in the chat so you can link to it. But that will also feature rebates and other information very soon, coming this summer, hopefully sooner if we can get it up and running.
Yeah, and I'd just say that the California legislative efforts that we showed earlier are the push for these contractors to adapt. You all need to be the pull. You all need to drive when they come in your house and say, they tell me this is the best way for our state to meet its climate goals. You need to start offering this. Architects, builders carry a special weight with the contractors on that, and we'll get there.
Great. Thank you. Next question from Paul. What panel size do you recommend for a fully electrified home? I'm guessing 250 amps minimum.
Yeah, I saw several questions in the Q&A on panel size, and BDC has done some really good webinars on this. They took a Sierra house, I think it was 1,000 square feet, and electrified it with a 100 amp panel in the Sierras. Things like circuit sharing can unlock a given 30 amps to be shared between your EV charger and your cooktop, for instance. So there are workarounds if you don't want to upgrade your existing panel, which can be a hurdle for electrification of a building. But 200, 250 is probably the right range for a typical size home in your community.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen it as small as 100 amps pretty easily if you're careful and creative. One of the common solutions that I've seen is the load sharing, where you can actually switch between your dryer and your car charger because they're similar in terms of their electrical needs, and that's a pretty good solution for extending a panel without having to expand it. But yeah, 200 amps is more than enough in my experience for houses of most any size. But there are some interesting new technologies that are coming out as well. There's a brand new, almost ready for market heat pump water heater that'll be 120 amps. You just plug it into the wall. So the manufacturers are working on this today to
I think
help
you mean
make
120
it
volt.
I'm sorry, you're right, 120 volt. Yeah.
Because I was in the Q&A as well. There are low voltage, regular standard voltage versions of most of these systems coming up.
Great. Thank you both. Moving on to the next question from Shauna McGarry. I've heard that designing to passive home standards can be equally important for lowering a home's energy needs. Have any cities in California integrated these into their codes?
So no code, as far as I'm aware, in the state of California requires passive house. It's absolutely a fantastic standard to utilize if you're building new. And where I've seen it used the most is actually in the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, kind of New England area, but it is not required anywhere, as far as I know, in the state of California.
Great. Thank you. So next question from David Winkler. To further lower carbon emissions, will the City of Solana Beach consider requiring EV charging in all new buildings and remodels, as well as in the public rights of way? Well, but the city's climate action plan does have some pretty aggressive goals as it comes to EV charging, as well as I believe the Green Building Code requires this for new construction, but maybe Nick or Amy can confirm that. But yes, we are looking to increase the EV charging infrastructure throughout the city, as that is our largest GHG emissions, as Peter mentioned in the beginning. And we're looking at some creative ways of doing that now. So yes, that we are as a city looking at that, and we'd like to increase the infrastructure wherever we can.
And I would just add, Dan and David, that the idea of having charging in public rights of way is really interesting and something that, yeah, we'll probably take into consideration among the other measures we're looking at. So yeah, appreciate the question.
Mm-hmm. It looks like the next two questions from Council Member Edson have been answered during the presentation. So we'll move on to the question from Donald Mosier. We have electric vehicles, heat pump, water heater, but we have no more 220 circuit capacity. Suggestions for service upgrades.
Yeah, that's where a circuit sharing could potentially solve the issue between two 220 volt systems.
Great. So the next question from Dave Clemens, and I believe this is in the chat as well. Can you use the carbon savings that we generate by having rooftop solar in the city's calculations? I guess from the city's perspective, yes, when we update our greenhouse gas inventories and through our climate action plan update, any generation that comes from rooftop solar would obviously take away from the electricity being pulled from the grid. And so the more solar we have, the less energy theoretically we're using. And so that we would be able to take credit for in our greenhouse gas emission updates and our climate action plan. Does that answer that? Okay, the next question's from Gary Martin. Based on the photos, the heating, cooling equipment was installed high on the wall or ceiling. But as we all know, heat rises, so it does not seem efficient to install heating units on the ceiling. This was the problem with the 1960s approach of installing heating wires in the ceiling. Also with cooling, since cool air falls to the ground. So it appears that there will be need to be a separate unit for heating installed low and a separate unit for cooling installed high. Is this analysis accurate?
Well, it's a balancing act, Gary. We do see floor registers more commonly in heating dominated climate zones and registers up in the ceiling and high on the wall in cooling dominated climate zones. You have to pick one or the other, right? And today's heat pumps have good enough what we call throw that they're able to generate, properly installed good mixing of that air with the incoming air, and you're getting sort of a swirl effect on the wall as it hits it, and you get good mixing with a properly installed system. So it's not an overly big issue.
Great, thank you, Nick. Next question from Chris Hine. Is there a source of independent review of heat pump brand reliability and expense to run versus energy savings?
Maybe Consumer Reports. I don't know of one, but there's a number of really solid brands available out there.
Next question is from the Chair of our Climate Action Commission, Jonathan Goodmacher. Not a question, but an observation. We replaced a wall heater in an older house with a ductless mini split system, and the cost was equal to that of replacing it with a conventional heating and cooling system. Thank you.
That's consistent with our survey results as well.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. We answered that one. Next question from Jim. Concerning retrofits for existing homes, I've seen some of your webinars that show how it's possible to electrify a home with a 120 amp panel and 220 volt is only limited locations, i.e. there's only 120 volts for air, water, heat pumps. Is it really possible to electrify such a home without compromises such as time sharing circuits?
I think he's referring to BDC webinars, but you can't do it all. You can't electrify a mansion with a 100 amp panel, so there are limits. But what we find is most panels are adequate to do it. And in some cases, you're going to need to upgrade the panel. But what I tell my clients is, you're going to need to upgrade the panel anyway if you want to install current technologies or solar panels. And so you might as well do it as part of this process.
And I would say that it absolutely is possible, but the scale of the home matters. So it is not a universal, and looking at expanding the panel size is a potential challenge that people will face if they really want to go big, or if, but if they're looking at either an addition to a home or already expanding through a variety of reasons, if you want 2 car chargers, for example, it's really hard to do this on a small panel. So there are definitely places where expanding the panel size just makes it more possible.
Great, thank you both. The next question is from David Kramer. Are there any developed countries or regions in the world that do not have a residential natural gas infrastructure, use primarily electricity? And if so, have there been any studies that indicate that those places have lower detrimental CO2 emissions?
I don't know about the studies, but definitely the lots of places, I mean, even in California, don't have piped natural gas. Go at a substantial portion of our state, in fact, and there might be places that have propane, but propane alone from a carbon perspective is actually far superior. So I don't know of specific numbers behind that, but there's certainly good examples.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would just raise the example of the Pacific Northwest, not so much in a study of CO2 emissions, but they have extremely low rates, electricity rates, because of all their hydropower. And so they have less natural gas infrastructure as a result. They have a lot of standard old electric water heaters, for instance, that have all been replaced with heat pump water heaters. And they have heat pumps or space conditioning far in excess of what we have. So they're really a model for us in early heat pump adoption in general. And we've learned a lot from them.
Great.
Oh, can I offer a clarification too? Peter clarified that I may have got the electric rates that you all have in Solana Beach dead wrong, and that there's one component on your CCA bill and another component on your SDG&E bill. So stay tuned for more information on predicted utility cost savings from heat pumps.
Great. Yeah, I was going to follow up with that as well. In comparing generation rates as well as PCIA and transmission distribution. So, okay.
Yeah, sorry, Dan, just to follow up with that, since I wanted to point that out. So Nick, have you done modeling with SDG&E territory? Because I mean, it's pretty simple today. Right now, our rate all bundled up is on parity with SDG&E rates, right? As a CCA.
Okay.
So if you have modeling with respect to SDG&E, that would be apples to apples with what our CCA is right now. And I do think it's worth pointing out that, it reduces your level of excitement just from that, because, if you just look at our rates, it's really exciting, but a lot of these appliances are still incredibly useful in our territory and incredibly helpful. I mean, I'm currently going through a remodel on my property as well, which includes a small ADU, otherwise guest house. And in that unit, the most obvious thing was to put in a mini split system, and it will work very well. And then for the main house, we're putting in a heat pump, and it was, you just run through what modern technology is out there. And if you are going through a major renovation, there's a lot of advantages to it.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. Next question, looks like we have 2 more. In the electric preferred option, a building has to exceed Title 24 standards by 10%, for example. Are those standards the cost benefit ratios, both an energy compliance margin, or can the mixed fuel building comply and still cause more GHG emissions?
John G., I love that you like to get in the weeds. So this was maybe not a question for everyone, but I will attempt to answer it in a way that makes sense. So absolutely, the way the percentages work are based on a example building in your area. So it's an energy compliance margin, not related at all to emissions. So yes, it is possible based on the decisions made in design, not regulated by the code, that a mixed fuel building could have more ultimate emissions, which is part of why most of the cities that are for pursuing a mixed fuel option or an electric preferred option, require that that building be electric ready so that eventually it can be converted.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Next question. I do believe we have a couple more in the chat. So not the last question, but when a heat pump unit is installed in a room, how much noise does it make when in operation? Does it make more noise than air being pushed out a wall ducted vent? Also, I appreciate the information you have provided this evening. Your presentation was informative and useful. Thank you. And I think that goes to both of you, Nick and Amy. Appreciate that.
If anything, a ductless mini split is quieter than a typical ducted system. It generally is ramping up and down as needed. So a lot of the time, especially in your climate zone, it's going to be just putting along quietly at very low output. So yeah, that's not an issue with those.
Great. And now I'm trying to find the two questions in chat, unless Tiffany, you have them.
Yeah, would you like me to read them, Dan?
That'd be great. Yes, thank you.
Okay, the first one is from Elaine Dodge. For existing homes, does it make sense to discard existing and functioning natural gas appliances?
It's a good question. So this is definitely a personal choice. I think that I've seen this work both ways. There's many folks who opt to electrify everything all at once if they can get a contractor who's capable of doing so. Just the simplicity of only having to deal with one contractor and one construction period, if you have the financial means to do so. Perhaps this is not the approach that most people would take, frankly. At this point in time, at least, while natural gas rates are low, there are certainly other circumstances at play that might push someone in this direction. But I would say it's up to the individual more than anything else.
Okay. And the next one, which I believe is the final question, is from Councilmember Kelly Harless. How will the tiered electric rates impact consumer costs given that energy use will be greater?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There is an open conversation right now with the California Public Utilities Commission around rates and how they will be structured for better options for all electric buildings. There are different rate classifications today for a building that is heated with electricity than if a building that is heated with gas. That helps to take that into consideration. But they are tiered. They're just tiered slightly differently.
Great. Thank you both. And I do have one final question, if that's all right. And only because it has been broached to us at the city as the Climate Action Commission looked into discussing this, starting last year or so. And that was more on the social justice and the social equity side of things. And the comment or I guess issue is if wealthy communities or affluent communities are moving in this direction, and I think this is more of the moratorium on natural gas and not necessarily some of the other ones, but if they're moving that direction, does that add an undue burden to lower income communities who are there, who are now potentially burdened with increased costs for maintaining the infrastructure of natural gas lines and the increased safety precautions that are going into place with natural gas lines as a result of increasing rates? Are they unduly burdened, and how do you balance that?
Well, it's a good ethical question. What about the greenhouse gas emissions from the power plants in those same disadvantaged communities? So it's really a balancing act. Our state's taking a well-informed, clear-eyed look at the gas infrastructure system. There's a proceeding right now, isn't there, Amy, on that before the CPUC?
There is, yeah, and one of the biggest things that we're seeing move forward right now is incentives and rebates and financing for those to really, frankly, to help move those who would be most financially impacted to electrify first. Wherever possible. And so that I think that that's a really big push that cannot be underestimated, and it also probably needs to be even bigger than it is. But there is a new funding program that has that emphasis that is coming out this summer. It's $80 million dedicated to that effort, largely around water heating first. But more is yet to come. And there's more that's certainly going to be needed. And one of the big misnomers here is around affordable housing in general, and in the new construction side of the equation, people are hesitant sometimes to say, well, we're putting this perhaps different type of construction into the hands of affordable housing developers, and actually they're already the ones that are leading the way because they see the writing on the wall. So the more we can do to uplift any disadvantaged communities and lower income residents within all communities to avoid this burden and to make the transition sooner, the better.
Great, thank you so much. That was really helpful. That's it from, I think, the Q&A section of the workshop. So am I passing this back over to Peter?
All right, thanks, Dan. That was a lot of juggling around, reading all those questions and reciting them while reading other ones at the same time. So good work on that. I'd just like to thank everyone for attending and asking just great questions. Special thanks to our presenters, Amy Ryder and Nick Brown, as well as Dave Zito and Dan. There's a lot of staff support led by City Manager Greg Wade, including Rimga Visconta, Tiffany Wade, who was on there as well, and Michael Manriquez. We do have some follow-up items, next steps. So video of this workshop, which has been mentioned, will be posted on the website. Rimga is available for additional feedback, so please provide any additional comments or questions to her. You see her email on the slide. And of course, City of Solana Beach e-blasts are a good way to keep up with things going on in this space and all other issues going on in the city. As well as the Climate Action Commission, we meet on the third Wednesday of every month at 5:30, currently by Zoom, but any comment or attendance is welcome as well. And I just want to finally recognize the commissioners who put a lot of time into this as well. Our chair, Jonathan Goodmacher, Mary Young, Shauna McGarry, Michael McClune, Judy Hegenauer, Heidi Duar, and Paul Basar. This has just been a great opportunity to get everyone engaged in this really important issue. So without further ado, thank you everyone and good night.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Peter, and thank you, Amy and Nick.
All right.